Good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday, 5 o'clock, and you know what that means. It's time for the Happy Hour Webcast from WhiskyCast. Good afternoon to you. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio in Haddonfield, New Jersey. Hope you've had a great week, that if you're celebrating the holidays, you are doing so safely, and you got your shopping done in a socially distanced manner, of course. Time to pour yourself a dram, relax for the next hour or so as we talk about whiskeys. And I want to start with the breaking news of the week right now, because in addition to the discussions in Washington that are going on trying to come up with some kind of an economic relief package for the economic crisis caused by the pandemic, we're also looking at several things that are going to affect the distilling community. And I want to bring in Chris Swonger, the CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council. Chris, how are you today?
Hi, Mark. Good afternoon and happy hour time. So thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you bet.
Let's get the update. First of all, it's 5 o'clock, Friday the 18th, and tonight was the night they were supposed to have everything wrapped up on the Hill and be ready to go home for the holidays, and they're not going to make it, are they?
Yeah, we've been living on pins and needles over the last couple of days, and it's part of the seems like the annual suspense of the dog days of December. But look, we're feeling fairly good about where we are. Obviously, the leadership of Congress is trying to negotiate not only an omnibus government spending package, but an economic relief package. And we're staying close to the folks up on Capitol Hill and leadership. And, we were hoping that, a package would come together probably Wednesday, and that's been pushed back a little bit. But here's a little bit of the good news, Mark, and for all your listeners. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, has basically stated that they're not going to go home until a package is brought to Congress for a vote. So we know we have a very, very invested Senate Majority Leader, and they're working through the four corners, is what it's called, which would include Senator McConnell, McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, the Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader. They're really working hard to try to land a package. Obviously, we're advocating strong to take the Craft Beverage Modernization Tax Reform Act and make it permanent. These packages sometimes are held together by a thread with a lot of different issues. So we just gotta, we're sitting and waiting. We're feeling good. Great thank you to many, many distillers that have signed up to Spirits United, which is our grassroots platform. On December 1st, we had over 39,000 letters go to Congress, and that advocacy has not slowed down since. So for all the listeners, check out www.spiritsunited.org and get the word in, because we're getting down to the short strokes. And we think, the government budget expires at midnight tonight. So what we're anticipating that could happen, fairly soon, is Congress will pass what's called a 2-day continuing resolution to allow the negotiations to be completed related to the overall budget and the economic stimulus package for COVID-19. So as soon as we know exactly what's included in that package, we'll be sure to let you know.
Let's go through the myriad of things that you guys have to worry about tonight. Let's see. COVID economic relief, which helps small businesses,
No
which
doubt.
affect the liquor retailers, restaurants, and bars.
Yeah.
You got to get the Craft Beverage Tax Modernization Act through. And if they don't get the budget passed, then the TTB gets shut down at midnight, which means
Correct.
no more label approvals and regulatory issues, although they'll still collect the taxes. Those folks are essential, but the label approvals get put on hold. And last year when this happened, the last time this happened, they were down for a month, and it took weeks for them to clear that backlog.
Yeah, Mark. I mean, maybe I'm looking at this a little bit optimistic, but there's no sense, coming off of from Congress that anybody's interested in a government shutdown for any lengthy period of time. They may have a very short one at midnight, but the plan is to pass a continuing resolution. There's two great Senate races in Georgia on January 5th. The administration doesn't want a government shutdown, and certainly members of Congress don't either. So I'm not overly too worried. Anything can happen, and I could be proven to be a silly fool when it's all said and done. But we're not overly alarmed about a government shutdown because I think there's a lot of political will to keep things running, and I think there's a lot of political will to get a COVID-19 relief package as well and to pass a budget. So it is just getting down to the short strokes, and there's a lot of politics involved and a lot of pressure for the four leaders of Congress to kind of find some common ground, and they're working, really, really hard to do that. Engage with the Senate Majority Leader's office, obviously, because Senator McConnell's from Kentucky, and certainly recognizes what's important for Kentucky bourbon, whiskey distillers, and so forth. So, we've left it all on the field, and we'll see what's in the final product. But we're feeling pretty good. But look, our provision is dependent on other provisions as well. But no doubt, the country and many, many people need a COVID-19 relief package. Mark, the other thing that I would just register, and we can go into this, we're keeping our eyes closely on the tariffs with the negotiations underway related to the Boeing and Airbus case. That has
I
been
was just about
ongoing.
to go there
Yeah,
because the USTR, the trade representative Robert Lighthizer, suggested a couple of days ago that there might be some wiggle room here on the Scotch whiskey tariffs.
absolutely, and we applaud that. And I had the opportunity in a socially distanced way to bump into the ambassador just last week, as a matter of fact, really encouraging him, underscoring our industry support to help do our part to settle the Boeing and Airbus case, where tariffs are implied on single malt Scotch, cordials, liqueurs, and Irish whiskey, and in return, with support with the UK and the US bilateral negotiations. Maybe there is a possibility of removing the tariffs on single malt Scotch, but in addition to that, removing the tariffs on American whiskey as well. So that is an important one that we're following. And, with the anticipation of the likelihood of a Biden administration coming in, we're certainly well aware that the president-elect is looking to reset the relationship with the EU in quick order. So we are hopeful that in the coming months, maybe we can have a chance to resolve the tariffs as well.
I applaud you for being able to talk to him in a socially distanced manner because I got to admit, I probably would have delivered a hip check that might have knocked him halfway across Capitol Hill if I'd been in there. But I got to applaud you for doing it diplomatically. Of course, I'm a journalist and you are a political professional and a industry representative, so you have to do that stuff.
Yeah, it was challenging because obviously I've never been in a situation like that with full face mask on and so forth. So it was a little bit of a unique opportunity. Mark, the other thing Young wanted to report out that's very, very important for the industry that we're waiting on, and this could come by year end, maybe soon after Christmas, but the publishing of the U.S. dietary guidelines, and it's something that we're very hopeful about because historically, the U.S. dietary guidelines certainly has recognized the importance of the moderate consumption of beverage alcohol. We ran into some challenges with a recommendation from a subcommittee over the summer, and we didn't feel like that they were really following sound science, where they would change the guidelines for the recommendations for the moderate consumption of alcohol consumption for men, where they recommended changing it from 2 drinks a day for a man to 1 drink a day. And we're really, really concerned that they weren't following the science as required by law. So with the issue of the craft beverage bill, obviously we'll get some details and we'll know where this is all going, I think, in the next 48 to 72 hours, hopefully, certainly by Christmas time, because the members of Congress are going to be motivated to get all this done. And then certainly we're tracking the developments on the tariffs front as well, and then the U.S. dietary guidelines, which is very, very important for the industry.
Well, Chris, I'm going to let you go because I know you've got work to do since it's 5 o'clock and you're still wearing a tie on Friday afternoon. So you've got work to do, but if we're still on the air and you get word of anything, please jump back in the room and we'll bring you in.
You got it.
Breaking news, okay?
If we get any breaking news, I'll let you know. And please, everyone, check out www.spiritsunited.org and sign up. And you can send a quick message to your member of Congress, just reminding them just how critically important it is to make permanent the Craft Beverage Modernization Tax Reform Act. So we appreciate everybody's help. Stay safe and healthy, and happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas to everybody.
All right. Thank you, Chris. And hopefully we can share a dram again together real soon. Thank you again.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
That's Chris Swonger, the CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, joining us from Washington. Once again, we'll have the latest on this. Whatever happens over the weekend, we will have an update on the podcast when it comes out on Sunday. Hopefully, they will get all this resolved. And I hate having to bring politics into whiskey, but what's happening in Washington right now affects whiskey drinkers on multiple fronts because of the pandemic with the economic aid, as I mentioned, the need to get stimulus funding passed that helps the restaurant and bar industry, that helps all of us who could use some help right now out there who have not been working, that need some economic assistance. Little of everything. You've got to get the budget passed to keep TTB going. You've got to get the the Craft Beverage Tax Act changed and either made permanent or kick the can down the road for another year, just so that we can keep craft distillers in business. Because as we heard on the podcast this past week, if that tax goes back up, it would be a 400% tax increase that takes effect 2 weeks from today. And the price of the whiskeys from small-scale distilleries that you buy will go up in the new year if you're in the United States, if that tax is allowed to go through. Before I bring in Philippe Giraud, I do want to give you an update on a couple of weeks ago, we had Greg Swartz, the director of the Water of Life film, on the show. And we now have some new updates from Greg. I talked with him a couple of days ago for a podcast we'll be running during the holidays. But I wanted to give you a quick update on where that stands in terms of when you'll finally be able to see the Water of Life.
This first screening is going to begin on January 22nd. We're going to do it sort of tying in with Burns Night. It seemed appropriate. We were looking for a date. And then we're going to be doing it a number of times because we have an audience that's sort of spread around the world. We're going to do it a number of times a day, 4 or 5 days. That's part of that whole celebration.
And that's all going to be online, right?
Yes, that is going to be online, streamed through our website. And each different day, the reason we're doing multiple days is because each different day we're going to have a different Q&A with some of the people who've been in the film.
So who all is in this one?
Well, I hope I don't leave anyone out. It's a big cast list, but Jim McEwen, Billy Walker, David Stewart, Charles McLean, Adam Hannett, Mark Renier, Neil Ridley, Blair Bowman, Liam Hughes, Stephen Rankin, Rachel Berry, Becky Paskin, Jenna Eli, Josh Peters. They're the only 2 Americans in the film, which wasn't by design, but it occurred to, I was talking to Josh the other day, and it occurred to both of us that there's only 2 Americans in the film. But it's about Scotch whiskey, so that makes sense.
Once again, that's Greg Swartz, the director of The Water of Life. He was on the webcast a couple of weeks ago, and we'll try to have more details on when you can start getting tickets for that. Actually, the tickets are now available through wateroflifefilm.com. And you can give those tickets as Christmas presents if you want. And there will also be some tasting kits available to go along with the movie. You can get all those details at wateroflifefilm.com. Now, I want to bring in our guest for the rest of the show right now. We've talked about French whiskey occasionally. It's a subject that, when we talk about France and whiskey, we generally talk about it in terms of France being the number one market for Scotch whiskey exports by volume, while the U.S. is the number one export market by value. That's because the French drink a lot more whiskey than we do in the United States by volume, but the U.S. gets the higher priced bottles. But unless you've had the chance, we really don't get the chance to talk much about the whiskey that is being made in France. And I want to bring in Philippe Giraud. Welcome, Philippe. He's joining us from Miami. And Philippe's family has been involved in the cognac industry for generations, until a few years ago. But now they're making whiskey. And this is the Alfred Giraud French malt whiskey. This is the Harmony release. There are two right now, Harmony and Heritage. And Philippe, tell us first of all how your family made the transition from cognac to whiskey.
Well, Mark, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. You know, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm like you, I have no tie. I poured the drum and ready to enjoy a nice conversation. So thank you for that. Well, we originally we were coopers. In the 19th century, we were employed at cooperages, and we would produce casks. And that happened until 1910, when my great-great-grandfather, Louis Giraud, joined a cognac company, which at that time was a small cognac company, which has grown a lot since then. But it was a small cognac company. He supervised the cognac for that company. He was there until his retirement in 1924. He trained his son, Alfred, who was the cellar master of that same cognac company until 1960, who trained his son, André, the third generation, who was cellar master until 1990. Then came my father. My father worked there in the same cognac company his whole life. He was not in production. He actually managed the company. But we switched to cognac in 1910. I very briefly worked for the same group, but only a couple of years, and actually not on the cognac side, on the liquor side. And then in 1995, I was hired by William Grant & Sons and sent to the United States for a commercial role in Latin America. So I spent 9 years with William Grant, and that's when I got to discover whiskey and develop a passion for whiskey, and from there the idea of one day producing our own whiskey in France started. I didn't have the means to do this when I left William Grant & Sons in 2004 to start my own business. I did not have the means, the capital to do this immediately. So I did other things. First, we have a business that distributes wines and spirits and luxury brand in general. And it is only in 2011 that after sitting down with my family, I convinced them that France can produce a high quality whiskey. There is no reason why France will not have one day leading whiskey brands. So we started to design a project where we actually brought a small team of ex-cognac cellar masters. One of them is my great uncle, but also his successor, Georges Clos. And we brought them over and designed a project to work on a high quality French whiskey. We did it very discreetly until 2018, for 7 years. Very discreetly, we did not even mention it to anyone until we had to prepare for the launch, which took place in 2019 in France. So that's how we transitioned to cognac. I would say I'm the fifth generation who happened to go from cognac to Scotch whiskey through William Grant's and got to love whiskey, and then we started this project, a family project.
And it's more than just bottling whiskey. You have a distillery and a maltings.
Yeah, so we have done a lot since we started to work on this in 2011. When we started, we had no distillery, and we didn't mind. In fact, Originally, our project, because we come from Cognac, where blending is king, blending is a specificity of Cognac. We first said we actually don't need a distillery. We're going to buy the best distillates available in France. We are going to bring them to Cognac. We are going to age them, and and do this great aging and blending work. And we started like this, but quite quickly we realized that to secure the quality and also the quantity of our whiskey, we needed to develop our own grain to glass production process. So since then we invested a lot. Today we have a partnership with barley growers in the northeast of France and around the Cognac region, organic, non-organic. So we select very carefully our barley. We then acquired a malting facility, share 35% of a malting facility in the east of France. It's the only small malting facility in continental Europe that works 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, that works continuously. And we only malt 1,000 tons of barley per year for us and for another French whiskey brand. So, but this malting facility allows us to really control the malting of the barley, which we deem to be essential for the quality of the whiskey. We had an issue with malting before, which is specific to continental Europe more than Scotland. In continental Europe, the malting industry in the last, I would say, 10 to 20 years consolidated very much. You've got very few malting units left, normally very big. They malt, 200,000, 250,000 tons a year, and they tend to work 90% for the beer industry. So the malting process for beer is not ideal for whiskey. It's not exactly the same, and we really wanted to control our malting. That's why we invested in this, and we also wanted to be able to trace our barley, because we had incidents in when we believe that the malted barley that we got back from third-party malters, was not the barley we had given them. So that's the reason why we decided to invest in this malting facility. Then we actually did a joint venture with an existing Cognac distiller, a company called SVE, 7th generation, very qualitative Cognac distiller in Cognac. We did a joint venture with them. We built a milling and mashing facility adjacent to our partner's Cognac distillery. So, we can make our own brassin. I'm not sure how you say brassin in English, our own beer. And then we distill it in his Cognac stills. But that distillery distills exclusively for us. It distills his Cognac and our whiskey. So we really control the distilling. So malting, milling, mashing, distilling, and then we start the heavy work of blending and aging, which is really our specificity and our expertise because of our 100 years, working as cellar masters of a big Cognac house.
You just mentioned that this distillery is doing both Cognac and whiskey. And I want to clear up a misconception, because there are a lot of folks who believe that French law essentially says that if you use a still to make Cognac, you can't use that same still to make whiskey. That's not the case, is it?
No, that's not the case. What French law says is that you must distill Cognac between the date of the harvest, of the grapes, and March 31st. There is a legal period for distilling Cognac. So historically, the many Cognac distilleries would actually shut down between April 1st and roughly the beginning of September. And you had all these very beautiful and expensive assets that were not being used. 25 years ago, my generation, when I was a kid, my friends in Cognac, whose families owned Cognac distilleries, started to say, wait a second, we've got these assets that are being, that are not being used 6 months a year. What could we do? And that's when the Cognac region started to produce other things. And in fact, today, Cognac produces not only Cognac, but many other spirits. In fact, the biggest super premium vodka brands are distilled in Cognac. Grey Goose is distilled in Cognac. Ciroc vodka is distilled in Cognac. Some gin brands are distilled in Cognac. So Cognac has become a big spirit production region. It's actually known as the Spirit Valley in France. And the Spirit Valley produces a very high share of all super premium spirits in the world. I heard an amazing statistics. I'm just going to repeat it from the president of the Spirits Valley. I read this recently in an interview, and he was saying that 50% of all spirits in the world sold above $32 or $34, I don't remember, are actually being produced in the Cognac region. That is obviously most of the Cognac, but also very strong brands like the ones I mentioned of vodka and some gin brands. So Cognac has become a super premium spirit production in general.
And you told me something when we talked the other day that I was just completely stunned by. We've talked about the Irish whiskey renaissance going from 4 distilleries 20 years ago to 38 today.
Mm-hmm.
Yet you have more than double that in France. I counted these up, and we're looking at like 90 distilleries making whiskey or having made whiskey or in the planning process in France.
Yeah. It's amazing, and the business is booming. The French whiskey category remains small. There is a risk that production is actually going ahead of consumption. It's a small category, but it's growing very fast, and there is a lot of enthusiasm for French whiskey in the country right now. And you're right, there are around 80 active distilleries right now. I believe there is another 7 or 8 projects under construction. And that is more than twice the number of distilleries in Ireland. You're absolutely right. It's not as many as in Scotland, but it's significantly more than in Ireland. Most of them, however, are very small distilleries, very small. I mean, just to give you an idea, in our case at Alfred Giraud, when we started to distill just a few years ago, we are already, among probably the top 3 or 4 biggest distillers in terms of volume, and these volumes remain very small. So it's very fragmented. It's small, growing fast. A lot of enthusiasm and a lot of distillery creations, very fragmented, and I'm sure we will see at some point some consolidation in the category.
We have some good questions coming in from the audience right now from our pal Chris Ratcliffe. The Cognac stills that he has seen photos of look quite funky, in his words. How does that affect the spirit compared to a traditional Scotch design pot still or a column still?
Well, I'm not sure exactly, but what funky means, but the
unusual. Let's say
unusual. Yes, they are unusual. We do believe that they are right to produce whiskey. It's a double distillation, and the stills are heated by direct fire. And we also believe that the heating by direct fire helps when it comes to the distilling. So we are not saying that Cognac stills are better than Scotch stills or to produce whiskey, but we certainly see no disadvantage. They might also look a little bit funky because the Cognac distilleries are very old. Most of them are very old, like whiskey distilleries in Scotland, and therefore the environment of the stills is sometimes a little bit dark or old. But we feel that the Cognac still is just a perfect perfect for the distillation of whiskey.
Graham Fraser's question, what's the proportion of French whiskey sold in France compared to Scotch currently? Now, we know France is the number one market by volume, which means that, for instance, one of the most popular whiskeys in France from Scotland is the Glen Grant 5-year-old. You won't see that in most other export markets, but it's very popular in France. And so how is the French market for French whiskey?
Well, I can give you an idea of this proportion. It's roughly 1 to probably at least 100 today. The consumption of Scotch whiskey in volume is around 100 times higher. French whiskey would consume, French people would consume around probably today 100,000 9-liter cases, and Scotch whiskey is well above 10 million cases. So it is actually more than 1 to 100. You are right. The gap is very slowly, obviously closing, but there is still a long way to go for French whiskey to catch up.
And you mentioned that the production is very small. For instance, this Harmony, annual release of 7 casks.
Yes.
So it's not like you're making a lot of this stuff yet.
No, I know that's quite amazing. You know, I told you about the malting facility and the distillation, and then I mentioned the heavy blending and aging work starts. So we have one specificity at Alfred Giraud. It is that today, for the only 2 creations that we have out in the market, one is Harmony, which you just showed, and the other one is called Heritage. Harmony being very slightly pitted. The bottleneck for us in terms of production is not distilling. We are today actually distilling much more than the equivalent of 30 casks, 7 casks for Harmony and 23 for Heritage. No, the bottleneck for us is the scarcity of a rare cask, of these extraordinary casks that we use. We use casks that contained cognac of up to 65, 70 years of age. And these casks are very difficult to obtain, of course. They are very valuable casks. In our case, we are not interested in the cognac. We are interested in the, 15 liters of this very old cognac that is soaked into the wood of the cask. So when we empty the cognac and resell the cognac, we immediately place our whiskeys in these casks, and over time you've got this around 15 liters of very old cognac that comes back into the whiskey, and that gives it this edge that we have a very, very gourmand, very, very long finish, very, very elegant whiskey. But the bottleneck is this access to very old casks. So you are right. We produced this year 23 casks of Heritage and only 7 casks of Harmony. And we produced 1 cask, a single cask of a third creation called Voyage, which is a totally different process. So whiskey never made before, aged in a wood called French Robinia, which is a subfamily of Acacia, and Sauterne and French Robinia. But we were only able to bottle this year an experimental casks that we have been working on for years, and it was only 1 cask, 400 bottles. They were sold in a matter of hours and exclusively in France. Unfortunately, we could not take it to the United States. We didn't have enough. So yes, we are often described as the haute couture of French whiskey. We focus on micro production, micro batches. You are right, but we have projects in the future to come up with other creations, higher volume, aged in very high quality cask, but not necessarily, very rare casks.
Chris Ratcliffe has another question. How do French consumers view French whiskeys? Do they look for the whiskeys they know, or do they see regional products as a cause célèbre? Do they look for French whiskeys out of patriotic pride?
Yes, it's a very good question. I would say more and more. It's actually quite interesting. The reason why whiskey is so big in France is because whiskey became popular in France after the war, because the American soldiers who spent time after the war, who came to liberate our country. Let's not forget that. The American soldiers who liberated our country were drinking whiskey. And of course, the French admired them, so this admiration for whiskey grew, and the whiskey category as a whole grew starting after World War II. And it moved quickly, I would say, to Scotch whiskey, and that's the reason why Scotch whiskey became very big. But it was very fashionable. The French would look up at drinking foreign whiskey, and especially Scotch whiskey, for many, many years. And in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, there is a comeback probably to some kind of patriotism, where many French are proud to support the local economy, support the local distilleries, and drink our home product. But again, let's not forget that the consumption of foreign whiskey in France is roughly 100 times the consumption of French products. So it remains small, but it's growing very fast.
Emmett Hossack in Ottawa, Ontario, in Canada, wants you to talk about the flavor profile.
Yes.
Let's talk about your two whiskeys, and then is there a general flavor profile in France that compares to Scotch whiskey, for instance?
So France has 80 distilleries, and everyone does different things. The Brittany style is, even just for geographical reasons, is closer to Scotland. But in our case, our flavor profile, we produce a whiskey in an unusual way, and that probably has to do with the fact that we have this 100 years experience, in cognac, which is very much about blending. So a few points of differentiation. One, we blend a lot. In Scotland, very often you place the whiskey in the cask and you leave it there for years, and then you work some kind of finish, but you've got some standard production methods at the beginning, and blending does not occur very early. In our case, blending occurs very early. The first marriage of our whiskey happens after year 1, and the second marriage after year 2. So we blend regularly, almost annually. We blend and place the whiskey back to the casks. So there is this very early blending culture. Another point of differentiation is the reduction of alcohol content, and this is specific to cognac. In whiskey, many whiskey houses tend to reduce the alcohol content late, and in some cases, even just before bottling. We reduce the alcohol content very progressively. We start reducing it during the first marriage, after 1 year of aging, because we consider, and that's a cognac methodology, that a very slow reduction process will help the molecules, to blend better, and will produce some more harmonized and elegant whiskies. So it's one of our specificities. And then when it comes to the aging, we work, of course, in our case, a lot with high quality cognac casks. We use a touch of New American oak. 4-5% of our wood when we start aging is New American oak. Probably 13-14% is New French oak, which, by the way, comes from our family forestry operation in Limousin. We happen to have a family forestry operation where we cut our trees, and we prepare the planks and the casks. So we really control everything from grain to glass. But the bulk of our wood is cognac cask and very old cognac cask, which is the reason why we need some new wood at the beginning to structure the whiskey. But our flavor profile, our typicity, is this old cognac touch that you find, which gives it a very smooth, very elegant, very long whiskey, despite a strong, high alcoholic strength. We are at around 46 degree alcohol volume. You have this length in the palate, which is very typical of the old cognacs. But it remains a whiskey. Let's just be clear. It's not a cognac.
Sergios Floridis in Dublin wants to know if there are any regulations on French whiskey that are different to those of Scotch or Irish. And I would suspect that because, at least for another few days, all three are part of the European Union, you follow the EU guidelines on whiskey for the most part, right?
Yes, we do, and they are very much aligned somehow on the Scotch regulations. I mean, for a whiskey to be French, it has to be distilled, it has to be aged, and it has to be bottled in France. So we have had not issues, but there were cases where some, including qualitative guys, would bring some Scotch bulk in France and then age this bulk of this Scotch whiskey, sometimes in a very qualitative way, and at some point would claim it was French whiskey because it was aged 100% in France, but the whiskey was not from France. So there is today a French Whiskey Federation which has got organized, managed by a great gentleman named Philippe, who is doing an excellent work at putting some order in all this. And today the indelicate people are being brought, back to order. This is self-regulation. But it works, and cheaters today are not there anymore, and the ones who tried are quickly being brought back into order.
Another question from Sergios. The vast majority of cognac is not consumed in France. Do you think the same thing will happen with French whiskeys?
It's a very good question, and Sergios is right. The very vast majority of cognac is not consumed in France. In fact, I would think that around 99% of the cognac production is exported. That's the paradox of France. France drinks little cognac and a lot of whiskey, and a lot of Scotch whiskey. So it's correct. Cognac is drunk mostly in the United States, which is the biggest cognac market, and where cognac is doing very well. It's drunk in China and in many other countries in the world. And for some reasons, it's just not a very strong category in France. What we are seeing with French whiskey right now is different. The bulk of the consumption happens in France, and it's growing. So we feel that the home market for French whiskey will be big, and especially that there is an appetite for whiskey. But we also feel that there is potential for export, and we are starting to see, and we see it in our case, demand, request from foreign markets for French whiskey, because it sounds logical to the consumer that France, as a spirit expert in general, and as a premium spirit expert, should have and will have a significant qualitative whiskey category. So there is a lot of interest from the consumer about what's happening in France, and we see it. We get requests, people contact us. We ship bottles, by courier to different countries in the world, and little by little, as we grow, we will expand our distribution.
Dave wants to know, he's asking if maturation in France must be somewhere between times in the U.S. and Scotland. It is a bit warmer in France, especially down in southeastern France in the Cognac region. How does that affect the maturation time?
It does. Legally, as in Scotland, you must be 3 years old to be called whiskey. So that's the minimum legal age. But you are right, Mark. The warmer the climate, and the more it accelerates the maturation. And that's the case in Cognac, which is significantly more south than Scotland. But there are also other things, other elements that accelerate potentially aging. For example, in our case, we pay much attention to the proportion of tight grain oak cask that we use versus loose grain. France produces the Limousin, where we have our forestry operation, produces both tight grain and loose grain. And we've got different distillates with different aging recipes and using different casks because the tight grain versus loose grain will also have an impact on the oxygenation and therefore the speed at which the whiskey mature. There is then the humidity of the warehouses. It's very different if you have a warehouse next to the Charente River, which is very humid and very damp in winter, or if you are like we are a few miles away from the river, which is a drier climate. So there are different elements that impact aging, but we agree with you, Mark. We tend to say that probably let's say 6-7 year old whiskey where we are probably achieves the maturity of a 8 or 9 year old whiskey in colder climates.
Georges Clos, you're a cellar master and blender. How hard was it to get him to switch and make that transition from blending cognacs for years to blending whiskeys?
It's a good question. Georges is a star. Georges is a renowned cognac master blender. Georges Clos. You Google him and you will find him. And Georges succeeded my great uncle André Giraud. So André Giraud was for 30 years the cellar master of one of the big cognac houses from 1960 to 1990. My father, in 1990, was the managing director of the company, and had to retire his uncle for age reasons. And he appointed, I mean, the shareholders appointed, but the company appointed Georges Clos to succeed my great uncle André Giraud, and Georges was the cellar master from 1990 to 2003, and that's when we as a family developed a friendship with him. Georges then retired from that cognac house, and it was not very hard to convince him to help us because he wanted to be involved. He wanted to keep working, and he's a very curious gentleman. He thought it would be interesting, and we asked him, to apply the best techniques of cognac to whiskey. We have another master blender, so that who complements him. But it jumped very happily into the project.
Well, he did an excellent job with the harmony here, and I'm going to show this bottle again because the design on this is stunning. And for a debut release for both this and the Heritage, how'd you come up with the bottle design for this, with the etchings and the raised parts here, the facets all throughout this? I mean, this is a custom bottle that it doesn't come cheap. Let's put it that way. How'd you come up with the design for this?
So no, it does not come cheap. It's funny because we have, when we wanted the whiskey to be beautiful, we wanted it to be good first and foremost, and we focused on the product for years. And then time to launch, hey, we also want it to be beautiful and express, the best of France. So we hired a designer, and it worked. But ultimately, to make it short, my girlfriend who works with us stepped in and took over the lead on design, and so the design is also a family project. The bottle is produced in Italy. It's the only thing. Everything is French. Everything about the whiskey is French. The ingredients, everything is French. We ended up producing the bottle. Sorry?
You don't own a glass company in the family.
No, we don't own a glass company. No. But we ended up producing the bottle in Italy. For us, Italy has the best glass in Europe, and we ended up producing with a company called Bormioli, very, very qualitative. And we have been a little bit taken by surprise, I have to say, by the how much people like the design, which is minimalistic but somehow different, and we like to think elegant. And it's true that people like the bottle.
Richard Dankovic has a question. Any thoughts or plans to work with Maison Ferrand to age any whiskey in plantation rum barrels?
We have a lot of respect for Maison Ferrand and Gabriel. The answer is no. We have no plan today, but we know him. Cognac is a small city. We all know each other. We respect him very much. He does a great job. And you know what? Hey, that's a good suggestion. Actually, I did not think about it, but that's a good idea.
Dave Kuhn wants to know if there's an advantage to getting a line on wine casks for aging when you're a French distillery. He has had some of his favorite whiskeys matured in Bordeaux casks, for instance. Being connected to the cognac industry, do you have a special line on cognac casks?
On the wine cask, yes. So we are looking into this. We have two master blenders, and the second one has a very strong wine background, loves wine, and we also happen to have great connections in the wine industry, because we have been doing this for a long time. So we have managed to get hold of some fantastic wine casks a few years ago, and we have been running trials. We have not yet released anything, but we believe that within a few years, I would say probably within 3 years, we will be able to release a high quality whiskey aged in wine casks. We have different approaches when it comes to wine. We are looking at wine region. We are looking at individual chateau, or we are looking at grape, grape type. And we have been running these experiments, and a lot of experiments in parallel. And there are some very interesting whiskey today that they are technically already whiskey. And we are seeing some very interesting things that we hope to release in the next few years. We are fortunate because our house has a good reputation in France, and that allows us to get our hands on some very well-known wine chateau casks. In many cases, we commit not to communicate on the name, and we don't want to use these names, but they just provide very high quality wine casks, and we have been able to run some very interesting trials. Red wine, white wine, different regions, different grapes. Yes, to answer the question in short, yes, we are looking at wine. In fact, I made a mistake. I said we never released anything with wine. It's not true. As I mentioned earlier, we just released this year one cask of a double malt aged in a combination of a new Robinia wood, which is a subfamily of acacia, and ex-Sauterne cask. So that there were wine casks involved in this.
Let's have you explain, as a cognac expert as well as a whiskey expert, because there are folks who are posing these questions. Let's explain the difference between brandy, cognac, and Armagnac. Because Armagnac is one of the few spirits I've talked about on WhiskyCast because it's a good value, but there are a lot of similarities, but it's also a lot of regional differences. If you can just sort of give us the quick nuts and bolts in 30 seconds or so, the difference between the three.
Yes. So a brandy, cognac is technically a brandy, but produced in the cognac region. Okay. When it comes to Armagnac, the difference there. I'm not a big connoisseur on Armagnac, but the main difference is that Armagnac is traditionally only distilled once, when cognac is a double distillation, but it's also the use of different barrels over a long period of time that gives Armagnac a distinction. Now, at some point, there were less control in the Armagnac industry than in the Cognac industry. Cognac is very regulated, when at some point in Armagnac, and I'm not saying it's the case today, I think they cleaned their house, but there were less control, and you would see sometimes some very, very old Armagnac appear, which, where might have been a little doubtful. So I think that this did hurt the Armagnac category overall, and it did not help them develop. The Armagnac never really took off. It's a fantastic spirit. It's not a big category in volume, but they do some great products. What else to tell you? I don't know, Mark. What else do you? I know you are a spirit expert. So how do you see it?
I know I would not call myself an expert on anything other. I wouldn't even call myself a whiskey expert. Let alone
you are a whiskey expert.
Chris Ratcliffe has a really good question. What are your thoughts on terroir in whiskey? Is there a terroir in whiskey? We know there is in wine.
Yes, there is a terroir in wine. Of course, it's probably less impactful on whiskey. So yes, there are terroirs for barley, of course. And the concept of terroir is very fashionable, I would say, and maybe a little bit too fashionable these days when it comes to whiskey, because the impact of a specific parcel versus another one on the final product, is not as important as the impact of a parcel and the type of grapes in wine. So we don't think that it has as much importance, but yet by having different barley and through different and qualitative malting methods, you end up with different distillates. So yes, the terroir matters, and you see a lot of brands, of course, some in Scotland now, but you see also in France brands like, for example, Le Haut de Glace, which is a very qualitative brand, a brand we admire. That belongs to Rémy Cointreau, Domaine des Glaces, which base their communication on the concept of terroir, but it's because it's real. They own the barley fields, and they harvest they cut their own barleys, and then they malt it. So they do control everything from the terroir to the whiskey. And in the end, yes, we think it has an influence on the whiskey, but certainly not as much as it does have on wine.
Good question from Forrest, who is watching us from North Carolina tonight. You mentioned that one of your expressions, I think it is the harmony, that is slightly peated. How did you decide to do a peated whiskey, and how was it achieved? I'm assuming there's peat bogs in France at some point.
So it's interesting because the only thing that by law cannot come from France when you produce a French whiskey is peat. It is illegal to extract peat in France and use it for commercial purposes. The peat is protected. And therefore, French whiskey regulations allow the importation of peat to produce peated whiskey. In our case, our signature blend is Heritage, which is not peated at all, and where you really feel, and I will send you a bottle, Mark, but you really feel this long, as I mentioned, typical gourmand, soft cognac touch. And that's our expertise, it's our signature. And when we wanted to launch another creation, we were interested in the concept of peat, but we said, wait a second, it has to be very slightly peated, very slightly. I think we are at like 6 ppm, 5-6 ppm. There is, you can testify, Mark. It's only this touch of peat. It's not even obvious when you through the nose or when you have it first in the mouth. So we peat it very slightly for two reasons. One, because peat is not in our DNA as cognac people, and two, because we did not want to hide that elegant cognac touch. In our eyes, peat is often a way also a way sometimes to hide some imperfection in a whiskey, and we we very much respect the heavily peated whiskey, which are great. I'm not saying that they are imperfect. There are some fantastic heavily peated whiskey, but it's just not our DNA or expertise, and it would not have been coherent for us.
Let's see here. Going through the last questions here. We have had a bunch of great questions coming in here. Let's talk about your maturation process. As Bill Ricker points out, cave is what the French call a rickhouse, so very appropriate. What kind of structures are you maturing your whiskeys in? Are you maturing them in what we would consider a rickhouse? Are you maturing them in a cellar or a cave? How do you mature your whiskeys?
We are. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with rickhouse. I'm sorry with the term.
Like the rickhouse, is it like a warehouse in Scotland?
A warehouse. Yes. So yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Like rickhouse would be the Kentucky term for it.
Yes. So we are maturing our whiskey in a warehouse that was built exclusively for our whiskey, and we aimed at having an average humidity through the floor, the ground of the warehouse, is porous, is not completely sealed, so that because we are in a region that can be on the hot side, especially during summer, we wanted to play the variation of temperature, summer, winter, and we allow for a higher level of humidity during the winter. But yes, it's a warehouse. It's similar to a warehouse in Scotland, what you call a rickhouse.
Graham Fraser in the UK has heard that French whiskey is quite expensive. Is there a particular reason for that? I would imagine a lot of it is taxes, but the big reason is that you don't make a lot of it, and it costs a lot to put a bottle like this together. So you have to make the money back somehow.
Mark, you're absolutely right. One of the reasons is the lack of critical mass, and I can, but also, of course, the work, the hard work, and the quality of the preparation. And I can give you a very good illustration of this. Our cost of goods for a bottle of Heritage, which is our entry-level whiskey, which in the US sells for $155 plus tax. Our cost of goods is 6 times the cost of goods of a big, well-known 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. I'm not going to give a name, but if you look at the big names of Scotch whiskey that we all know, we know because I worked in the Scotch whiskey industry for 9 years, and I have many friends there. Our cost of goods is 6 times the cost of goods of a very reputable 12-year-old Scotch whiskey, and yet we sell it for roughly twice the price. So our margins are significantly lower, which, by the way, is an issue because it then impacts your ability to promote the brand. But to answer your question, I think the high price of French whiskey is due to a combination of lack of critical mass. You're absolutely right, but also in some cases the quality of the work that is put into the product.
And Sergios, our buddy in Dublin, wants to know if you know Patrick Leger and any plans to do what Lambay Irish Whiskey does, which is also maturing in cognac casks on Lambay Island, just outside of Dublin, in the Irish Sea.
That is correct. So Lambay belongs to the Camus family, the Camus Cognac House, which is one of the main cognac houses. And great family and great producers, and they did acquire, I believe, the Lambay distillery, and they are playing synergies between their production facilities by having now the whiskey aged in cognac cask and in good quality cognac cask. I have to say I have not tasted the whiskey, but I heard good things about it, and we think it's an interesting concept. We have initiated a discussion with a Scotch whiskey company who has a very famous cellar master. It's a little bit too early to discuss it, but we have been planning some kind of collaborations, and one of them could be the exchange of cask, or we are looking at different angles. It's an interesting angle.
On the collaboration, and I'm just being facetious here, are you working with any French brewers? Only because I know there's all sorts of beer and whiskey collaborations going on in the U.S., in Ireland, in Scotland. Why not in France? France makes good beer.
It's another good point. We are not collaborating with brewers, and I'm not saying we would not, but it's just not a priority for us. We are looking at high quality spirits, high quality wine. We have not looked yet at breweries.
Crumpler points out that the puppy has a question. You may have heard some barking upstairs. Bader the Wonder Dog came home today. Guys, for those of you who saw, and I'm waiting for somebody to bring him down because we're not letting him run around in my office because of all the cables on the floor. But we've had a lot of fun with this. And Philippe, I want to thank you and best of luck with before I go, one more question. Why did you decide on naming it the company Alfred Giraud?
Well,
Giraud. Why Alfred?
Why Alfred? Well, Alfred is the in our family. I mentioned, the five generations that since 1910 in the cognac business. Well, actually four. My father and the three others. Alfred is the first one who was a cellar master his whole life, his entire life. His father, Louis Giraud, joined the cognac house in 1910, but he was already 53 years old when he joined. He had been a cooper for most of his life. He finished his life as a cellar master. He trained his son Alfred, and Alfred is the first one in our family who was a cellar master his entire life. So we decided in honor of Alfred, for my great grandfather, we decided to name our whiskey in his name.
Talking off camera to my daughter, who brought down the cat instead of the puppy. The cat got stuck, yes.
What other animals do you have hidden in your house, Mark?
One cat and the one puppy, but the cat is 18 years old and saw the dog come in this morning for the first time and went, oh, shit, here we go again. Pardon my language, but that cat has been through lived through 3 generations of dogs in this house.
You have to be careful with all the bottles behind you. You don't want to fight between the cat and the dog.
That's why they're not allowed down. Dick is asking, do you have a favorite Scotch whiskey? And
very good question.
Go ahead. So you can answer while Christina brings the puppy down, and watch the cables, please.
Well, when it comes to Scotch, I have a lot of admiration, and I'm not going to surprise anybody. I know it's not very... very original, but I do have a lot of admiration for Macallan. I think it's an incredible house. Hello. I love their classic range. I love the double cask range. I love the Sherry Oak, of course, the 25-year-old, the 18-year-old. I love all these basic Macallan products, which for me are just very well done and great whiskey. I mentioned earlier I worked for William Grant & Sons, which owns Balvenie. I also love Balvenie, which is a great brand. And I love Dalmore. I have been involved at some point in one of my businesses with the owners of Dalmore, White & Mackay, and I have seen the great qualitative work that has been done on Dalmore. And it's also one of the Scotch whiskey that I admire.
Philippe, I want to thank you for spending the time with us tonight and giving us an hour of your time heading into the holidays here. Best of luck with the whiskeys. The website is alfredgiroudwhiskey.com. And I look forward to trying more of these in the future. I want to thank you for the time. And I know that everybody's enjoyed the discussion tonight. So thanks for joining us.
Mark, thank you to you. Happy holidays to you, to the dog, and to the whole family.
And to your family as well. Happy holidays, and thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Okay, this is Bader the Wonder Puppy. Yes, well, good boy. Well, good boy. And I'm hoping he doesn't knock the microphone off here, but Bader the Sheepadoodle, as Chris Ratcliffe points out, the new WhiskyCast intern. We've not checked his nosing ability for whiskeys yet. You want to? Okay. Well, he's wiggling, so that's a good sign. Okay, I'm handing him over. Oof! Off camera. Yes. So thank you to everybody. Great conversation. Crumpler, happy holidays. What? And Fluffy Bader. You can follow Bader on Instagram, Fluffy_Bader. We do post pictures of him. Yes, the dog has his own Instagram feed, as since the day we picked him up. So, and as Crumpler points out, yes, he will detect any sulfur bomb whiskeys. Yes, Dave Kuhn, whiskey makes me wiggle too. So, salute. Hey, guys, we're going to take the next 2 Friday nights off because of the holidays. And as Richard Dankovic points out, the only thing in your life that is truly black and white. Yeah, because the hair is gray. Sorry, guys. So, Graham Fraser's asking if we're on next week. No, it's Christmas. Are you kidding? We're going to take Christmas and New Year's off. We're going to take Christmas and New Year's off because I'd like to spend some time with my family, just as you get to spend time with your family. We will come back in 3 weeks on January 8th with the webcast on Friday night. The podcast, we will have fresh episodes. I'm not even going to comment on Dave Kuhn's comment here. The name is Bader, Bader. So it's, Dave, you got that one wrong. But guys, thank you very much. Getting all these comments about wishing everybody a Merry Christmas. Hey, if you like the video, if you like these webcasts, please hit the like buttons on YouTube. It helps more people find them also. And Dave Kuhn will drink a dram to you on Christmas, and I'll drink a dram to all of you on Christmas, and probably a few more times between now and Christmas as well. Once again, we will be back with the webcast on January 8th. We will have a new podcast this weekend. My guest this weekend will be historian and author Dr. Nick Morgan, who is retiring from Diageo after 30 plus years. He wrote the book on the history of Johnnie Walker, and we're going to talk with him on sort of learn about not only his history, but the history that he uncovered about the brand. Until we meet again, I want to thank you all for joining us. Have a great holiday season. Take care of yourselves, wear your masks, take care of each other, and we'll see you January 8th. Sláinte, happy holidays, and thank you for watching. Good night, everyone.